Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I'm going to cover Joe Biden's press conference yesterday. Right? I haven't seen it yet, so I'm going to give you my, off the cuff reaction to it. But first, I just want to do a little introduction. I was going to include this in the video at the end of the video I made yesterday, but I ran out of juice. It was wearing out of work to do outside and things. Well, anyways, I want to include this here and then go to the Joe Biden thing. But I saw this headline from Huffington Post. Now, I knew that Joe Biden's speech was going to suck for him and his supporters because there's nothing he can say. And I'll get into that in just a moment, or when I cover his speech. I also got stuff on Chris Cuomo's making a statement about his brother and some other stuff I left out yesterday on Lizzo and Paulina Porizadokova and maybe some other stuff as well. But here's the headline. Biden defies the war machine stands squarely behind exit. And so the Huffington Post is the worst of all these, publications. It's just the absolute worst. And like I said, I've seen a few of his points. I know he blames the Afghan government because I just saw some headlines, but I haven't watched a speech yet. But I know it's going to be bad because there's nothing that you can say good about what's happening. And Joe Biden has been a part of these wars as a senator and a vice president and now as president for 20 years. 20 years, as he... So the Huffington Post putting this headline out there like he is against the war machine when his son was, he put his good son into the military, the one who died of brain cancer or whatever it was. His crackhead son certainly couldn't go into the military, but, that was not something his son had to do because he comes from wealth and privilege. It's because Joe Biden was hoping his son would follow him into politics. His other son, Bo, I think his name was, Bo Biden. So Bo Biden was the one that he had hopes for, right? And he knew his crackhead son wasn't ever going to amount to anything in terms of politics. But I mean, that's a political move, right? When these politicians put their kids into the military and they're taken care of and they're given privilege, just like the royal family. And so Joe Biden is tied to the military and these wars in the military-industrial complex in every possible way. He's a Washington, D.C. insider. And so for Huffington Post to pretend he's some anti-war guy when he was the vice president under Obama while they did the Arab Spring, which was worse than even what Cheney and George W. Bush were doing. They were like liberals and they were Democrats who were supposed to be anti-war. I mean, that were supposed to be the party of peace. The Republicans were supposed to be the war hawks. And they pushed these three military actions in Egypt, Libya, and Syria. So that was the Arab Spring. And so for Huffington Post to pretend Joe Biden, he was just standing up to those guys who just love war. It just shows you how bad things are. So what I wanted to say yesterday at the end, close of the video, is that if you're an American, and you can be a truther American, you can be a Democratic American, you can be an independent American, you could be a Republican American, whatever your point of view is as an American, that there are certain things in America that you like and that you need, and whether you're conscious of it or not, you take for granted. But you don't want to lose those things. Even if you're a person who hates America, there's things about the American lifestyle. Like there's these trendy hipsters in some coffee shop talking ironically like they are, like those beatniks in the 50s and 60s or whatever it is, talking about how they hate America, drinking their lattes and don't take my latte, right? And so what most people do is divorce the things they don't like about America and embrace the things they do like about America, American lifestyle, into, two separate categories. But they're all part of the same thing. That's the problem. That people think they can have the America they like if they can just get rid of the America that they don't like, the things that they don't like about America, like they can be separated out, but they're all part of what makes America work. You understand this? You can't, and not just America, the world culture, because our economic system is a debt-based economic system, right? A usury system, and it comes with, consequences. It's a demonic system. It goes away from the natural orders of things, where debt, an IOU, a promise to pay, is actually considered wealth, right? It's a liability. And so the idea of insolvency, a bank or a country is insolvent when its liabilities, what it owes, its debts, the ratio between debts and assets, liabilities and assets is so out of whack that you could never pay them back, right? That your debts are beyond your ability to pay back. You could never, even with a miracle, you couldn't pay them back, right? There's no way to pay back your debts with your projected assets. And so our system has decided to say, hey, let's turn our debts, our promises, into assets, right? Let's just call our debts assets and use them as currency. And that's how our system, our economic system, works, right? I've explained this over and over again in various videos. You can watch those cartoons, Money as Debt. There's Money as Debt 1 and 2 explains this in a very, understandable way. You don't have to be a financial genius or something that, studied economics. But what's happened is, in life, when you make a promise, when you owe somebody something, it doesn't have to be financial. It can be a life debt or whatever. When you feel like you owe somebody something, it is, it's a liability. Owing something is something you have to, work off, right? You're almost like a slave to that promise, to that, debt, whatever it might be. You're on the hook for it, right? You're responsible for it. And our government is promising that the dollars, the currency that you have, has value, just like the banks promise, these companies promise to deliver on their stocks or whatever it is. And so what they've done is taken these debts, these loans, these, what they put into derivatives market, the shorting of stocks and bonds and things like this, all these debts, right, that are, they're not worth anything. They're not substantial in any way. And they're actually a promise. They are, a liability, and turn them into wealth. So this is demonic, right? It goes against the natural order of things. What's considered wealth is now debt, right? All these people who are really wealthy, they've got, they borrow money. They borrow extreme amounts of money to start their companies, and, they're constantly borrowing money. And their expenses, they got to come up with $1 million a month, right, to pay off all their houses and all the, so they're, on the hook for payroll and for supplies and, whatever it might be, right? And a lot of these companies that are, considered valuable are upside down. Their expenses far outweigh their income, their profits. And so they are constantly in this cyclical debt, like people with their credit cards. And so when you have a situation like that, where your system is upside down and goes against the divine order of things, you have to do things to keep it going. You have to create illusions. You have to create, all kinds of, not just distractions, but create some sort of markets or some sort of huge expenditures, like these wars. Like we have a military-industrial complex in America, and we need wars. And we need conflict, not just with America, but other countries that are in war and conflict, to sell weapons like they're a drug, right? Like weapons that become a, economic solution or a solution for people in various countries, whether it be just rival, like sort of tribal gangs and things in countries that need weapons and need these arms to be sold to them. And so America has to engage in wars. And so these wars that were just atrocities, they're horrific events that happened, these latest, wars, starting with the Afghan-a-Stan one, which is the longest one, right? These, wars that shouldn't have ever taken place. They were, brought to you by BS, right? BS reasons that weren't true. The real reason is to keep the economy from collapsing and, just a whole host of reasons that didn't have anything to do with what they told you as an American, the reason that they were going, which is now coming out. The lie is there. The original lie to create the Afghanistan war, we had no business going there and messing around with that country because it had zero to do with us in reality. And Joe Biden, all these people were a part of it in the beginning, right? And now the lie has been exposed. And, it feels bad for Americans, but, most of them won't come to terms with everything I'm saying. That it's part of, the leaders are forced to do things like this to keep the system you're 100% dependent on going. And so we're all a part of it. That's why I mock the leadership and I say these things, but I'm aware of, a deeper understanding of the system, right? And then on a spiritual level, which I talk about here quite often, you have an internal connection to God. And this is, what I get from the heartfulness meditation, the practice of the heartfulness meditation, that is, increases a person's ability to connect to God internally, to connect to the, essence, the essence of love that is the media of all creation, right? The most subtle energy in the universe that has, a deeper purpose for, your soul has a deeper purpose than your ego does, right? Your ego has superficial desires to aggrandize itself, desires to, be great, right? To be something, to stand out, to be a star, to be better than other people, or to have more, be a king, right? To be to sit on a throne above the masses and rule over them and force them and, force them to do your bidding or whatever it might be, to subjugate peoples, right? The old, colonialist point of view of subjugating people that you deemed lesser than you with your, monstrous ego and your weapons and your whatever it might be. And so what we have is an ego-driven system, and we need a soul-driven system. But it has to be, married with the ego. Because people who are spiritual in nature, many of these tribal type of, village-based tribes and Aboriginal peoples were in communion and harmony with nature, but they weren't necessarily progressing spiritually in terms of deepening their approach to God, right? And they weren't advancing technologically because they had no desire to do so. Because when you're, a needs-based person, you're living in relationships with nature and your tribe and your family and you're happy and, you don't want to build skyscrapers, right? You don't want to, you don't have the desire to manufacture a bunch of stuff and, you don't want a cell phone. Like, you don't need it, right? And you actually can kind of sense that it will take you away from the happiness that you're enjoying with your family and, everybody else. According to the Heartfulness teachings, the second president and third master of the Heartfulness system, Master Charji, was talking about how there was a need for the world to connect, what we now understand as a global system, that people all around the world needed to connect. And you had tribal people that had no, they just didn't care about the world, right? They just cared about their local villages, their local tribes. They were pure in many ways, innocent, and things like this. And they just didn't have the ambition to make the world connect. But then you had people in Europe and the growing egotistical culture that were, necessary. Their ambition to conquer the world, their ambition to be rich, and their egotistical ambition was used and was necessary to create a world that we have today, right? Where there was connectivity, where people all around the world had access, and now even more so with the internet through travel, air travel, and travel by sea and vehicles and all these things. But now with technology and the internet, you can have a global connectivity where peoples all around the world, different peoples, could be connected. And now through this, driving economy. And so the desire was there, not the desire, the necessity to create a global connection. But the egos and the, some of the evil aspects of these big European countries, the colonialists and things, have created these other, desired-based, debt-based economic principles and things, and it is just way out of whack, right? And so where, the ego was used, the egos of these people was used to create, world connectivity, now you have a problem, a side effect, where now you have an ego-driven world where all these tribal people, simple people, are all competing for fame and fortune and celebrity and all these things that have been disconnected from their families and God and all the rest of it. But there's a reason for it. There's a divine reason for it. And now there needs to be a correction. Now there needs to be, the technological advancements, whatever's going on in terms of a world culture, but also a deep connection to God internally and a balancing out of people's hedonistic, materialistic desires. So there's a change coming, right? There's, going to be a paradigm shift, a massive paradigm shift. And it's going to happen from the inside out, where people are going to have to throw off their addiction to our current system and, the mentality behind it, the egotistical mentality behind it, and realize, the error of our ways collectively and the problems of the system, and switch to a new system based in our deepened connection to God internally. And how well that happens and how easily people embrace this change, which, as far as I can tell, on a conscious level, on the ego level, it's hard to tell on a soul level, because things are happening internally to people on a soul level that their ego isn't allowing them to see, and their ego isn't, open to exploring. And that's the problem, because the spiritual work is happening. I know that because I've seen it and participated in it in the Heartfulness system. That's happening on a soul level. But people's ability to recognize and accept it and actually be grateful for it is severely lacking. So with that in mind, let's go and see what JoJo had to say about this Afghanistan disaster. So here are some of the headlines. Joe Biden defends Afghanistan withdrawal. There was never a good time. We'll come back to that. Trapped by Taliban takeover Afghans who helped U.S. fear they've been abandoned. This is just, some of the headlines. Frantic escape, hundreds of Afghans pack U.S. planes. Amnesty pledge. There it is. This is the New York Post. Barbaric Taliban trying to lure Afghan women to join government. And then there was this down here I saw. Forced to be woke, ex-US WNT star claims Megan Rapinoe bullied team into kneeling. Hope Solo said that. I just threw that in there. So here we go. There's a podium. Still a podium. There's a dude with a camera. Wait, here comes JoJo Maghoul. He's coming out. There he goes. Look at him. Wearing a mask, coming out. Like from there to there, he had a mask on. There's no one within. This guy's at least 10, 15 feet away. But JoJo Maghoul, looking like he's some sort of CGI creation here, is coming in, bringing the goods.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Maghoul.
I want to speak today to the unfolding situation in Afghanistan.
You do? Okay. Well, this is coming out of nowhere.
The developments that have taken place in the last week and the steps we're taking to address the rapidly evolving events.
Crisis is the word being used by the media.
My national security team and I have been closely monitoring the situation on the ground in Afghanistan.
Have you, though? In what way? The same way we are?
And moving quickly to execute the plans we had put in place to respond to every constituency, including and contingency, including the rapid collapse we're seeing now. I'll speak more in a moment about the specific steps we're taking, but I want to remind everyone how we got here and what America's interests are in Afghanistan.
There are no interests because The whole interest was to get rid of the Taliban. It's a failure. And the failure happened when you guys realized.
We went to Afghanistan almost 20 years ago with clear goals. Get those who attacked us on September 11th, 2001, and make sure al-Qaeda could not use Afghanistan as a base from which to attack us again. We did that. We severely degraded al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. We never gave up the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and we got him. That was a decade ago.
Remember this photo?
Metastasized well beyond Afghanistan. We severely degraded al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. We never gave up the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and we got him.
Remember this image here with JoJo Maghoul, and there's Obama, Joint Chiefs of Staff, that dude that swatted Biden's hand when he went for his granddaughter. Hillary Clinton's got her hand over her mouth, and they said they were watching the whole thing that happened in Pakistan. And then there was this meme, right, where JoJo Maghoul was cast as the Flash. And there was Obama, and that dude is Superman, and Hillary as Wonder Woman, right? Memes are great.
That was a decade ago. Our mission in Afghanistan was never supposed to have been nation building.
So that's a complete lie, right? All of that was a lie because we know that none of that stuff happened in Afghanistan. They said that dude was in the foothills. It was in the mountains between Afghanistan and Pakistan, right? And that never turned out to be validated in any possible way. As far as we all know, right, other than trusting their story, that when America went to Afghanistan, the original reasons that he gave after the event, all these things, the original reasons that he said, the original idea here was that the Taliban who ran Afghanistan were providing a safe harbor for bad actors, as they call them, right? The official, intelligence community stuff. That they had to get rid of the Taliban because the Taliban were brutal and they were, open to having bad actors that were responsible for bad events in America in their country. And so the Taliban is now still in power. And so America went in there and got rid of the Taliban in terms of, running the country, but the Taliban was still there, waiting for America to leave, and now the Taliban is back in power, right? And even if America put in a puppet government like they did to get rid of the so-called bad actors, the bad actors were in the remote areas in the mountains that no one was going to mess with them anyway. You understand this? According to their official story. And so going into Afghanistan wasn't going to do any of the things that they said it was going to do. I mean, they have their official story about how there were some successes, but they were never going to get rid of the Taliban, and they were never going to be able to police. It's a very treacherous mountain region. I mean, the place itself is very mountainous, right? Jagged cliffs, and it's very hard to find your way around into these, remote areas, very rural areas, tribal areas. It's not like a cohesive country where a national government could impose its will on all of the people in the country like our national government does, right? Our national government is able to go out to the far reaches of the wilderness where people are living and monitor them and, all these things, right? It's a whole different system. In Afghanistan, they don't have the same kind of infrastructure to do that. So the whole idea of going there to do what he said, these objectives, wasn't possible, right? There's other reasons, and I've given them. Opium's worth a lot of money, and it grew well in Afghanistan. The Taliban was preventing opium from being produced there. They got rid of the Taliban, and then there was an opium crisis shortly thereafter in America, right? So, you do the math.
It was never supposed to be creating a unified, centralized democracy.
That's exactly what it's supposed to be. If you're going to take away a government, right, which is what they did, if you're going to get rid of a government, there's going to be a vacuum there. And the people themselves can't produce their own government because you're an occupying force that is telling them, is forcing them, that is controlling them. When the American military was there, America was then in charge of Afghanistan. And they weren't going to say, all right, what do you guys want? Oh, we want the Taliban. Well, you can't have them, right? So, America was going to impose its own government. That's what always happens when you invade another country. So all this stuff he's saying is it was never supposed to be this. Of course it was, right? They've done this all over the world. The CIA has gone into countries and got rid of a government, has killed the government, and then put in their own puppet government. It's happened over and over again. It's a part of the evil empire, right? Like he's just lying. You can't go in and get rid of a government and not put in your own government that you want the people of Afghanistan to have. It's just ridiculous, right?
Vital national interest in Afghanistan remains today what it has always been, preventing a terrorist attack on America's homeland. I've argued for many years that our mission should be narrowly focused on counterterrorism, not counterinsurgency or nation building. That's why I opposed the surge when it was proposed in 2009 when I was vice president. And that's why, as president, I'm adamant that we focus on the threats we face today in 2021, not yesterday's threats. Today, the terrorist threat has metastasized well beyond Afghanistan. Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, al-Nusra in Syria, ISIS attempting to create a caliphate in Syria and Iraq, and establishing affiliates in multiple countries in Africa and Asia.
I'm not going to comment about this because of just, YouTube. But there's an idea here that there are threats in countries that don't come from the government of the country, right? So this is a whole new way of viewing the world that started in 2001, that there are countries out there that don't have the ability or the will to get rid of independent groups that aren't a part of their government, that aren't a part of the official government of the country, that are somehow angry and threatening against America. America, which has wrecked countries over there, right? That there are groups of people who are really pissed off. Maybe their family was killed by drone strikes, by, Obama really loved to drone, people in Afghanistan and Iraq and these various places. I mean, George W. Bush, all these various presidents and the military, not just droning, but all of it, right? That families were torn apart, tragedies, and America went and imposed its will on countries throughout the Middle East and Africa, Northern Africa, and, across the globe. This is happening everywhere. And there is resources being taken away from people that we are enjoying here. America is 5% of the population, and we have 20% of the resources. We have sweatshops all over the world that are making our cell phones and things that we don't like to think about, right? That are unpleasant to think about, that our lifestyle is, is predicated on the oppression and basically slave labor of other people, our wealthy, indulgent lifestyle that we have. And so with all of that, right, people are going to get pissed off at America. And there are going to be groups that maybe, are, plotting something against America. Whether that's true or not, that's possible, right? And that's what he's saying is happening. And so what he's saying is America has the right to go into those countries, invade them, our military, and go and, attack people that are deemed a threat, right? Which is kind of effed up. Like, that's his position here, that it has to be something where American troops can go into any other country when people are angry at America and may try to, do something against America and Americans, right? And even though they themselves have lost family members to Americans, military and policies, whatever economic policies.
These threats warrant our attention and our resources. We conduct effective counterterrorism missions against terrorist groups in multiple countries where we don't have permanent military presence.
He's really struggling to read here. Like he's trying to get this speech out, and it's he's under fire. But, he's struggling here.
If necessary, we'll do the same in Afghanistan. We've developed counterterrorism over-the-horizon capability that will allow us to keep our eyes firmly fixed on the direct threats to the United States in the region and act quickly and decisively if needed. When I came into office, I inherited a deal that President Trump negotiated with the Taliban.
So this is where he starts blaming Trump, right? You didn't inherit that deal because his first days in office, this guy put out more executive orders to undo as much as he could with Trump. And Trump canceled the Iranian deal that Obama and Biden struck with Iran. And so any deal that Trump made, especially when it was very clear from Biden, what he said over and over again, that he was, even when he was with foreign leaders, we're back at the table. I just wanted to assure you, the Trump days are behind us and we're getting rid of everything Trump. But no, I had to keep this deal. He made his word to the Taliban. But, when President Trump put out, shook his hands with the leader of the Taliban, I don't even know who he is, but he's a guy, and Trump made a deal. I can't go against that deal. Like that's his excuse. And the media has been pushing this idea that he had to somehow accept the deal. Trump made a deal. I don't know. I can't go against Trump, right? The Taliban are your enemy. They're not legitimate. They're not a legitimate, what people think is a legitimate government. They're, considered these horrific people, right? I mean, that's what we hear about. Like, all we know from the Taliban is they're absolutely brutal. Some sort of religious gang-run theocracy type of, a mix of theocracy and a gang. That's what we know about them. I don't know anything about them, right? Just what I've understood from the media, right? But that's what we've been told. You didn't have to honor that deal.
Under his agreement, U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan by May 1, 2021, just a little over 3 months after I took office. U.S. forces had already drawn down during the Trump administration from roughly 15,500 American forces to 2,500 troops in country. And the Taliban was at its strongest militarily since 2001. The choice I had to make as your president was either to follow through on that agreement or be prepared to go back to fighting the Taliban in the middle of the spring fighting season.
They have a spring fighting season. It's like Fight Club over there. The spring comes out, and they just like to fight. They're big. They like to fight in the spring.
Fighting the Taliban in the middle of the spring fighting season. There would have been no ceasefire after May 1. There was no agreement protecting our forces after May 1. There was no status quo of stability without American casualties after May 1. There was only the cold reality of either following through on the agreement to withdraw our forces or escalating the conflict and sending thousands more American troops back into combat in Afghanistan.
See, he's trying to blame Trump for this, but he already just said that he doesn't want a nation build, that he doesn't want to occupy other countries. Like he said, it's always been his policy. When Obama did the surge of 3,000 troops in 2009, he was against it. He was against Obama, and he ran on Obama as a politician. Like he's trying to have it all kinds of different ways. He's blaming Trump for something that he says he agrees with, that he wants to withdraw and fight these, bad actors individually, not in terms of military occupation and nation building. He doesn't want to take over governments. He just wants to send troops in to fight the bad actors. He said how great that was and what he wants to do with Afghanistan, but now he's trying to pin it on Trump and Trump's deal. Trump drew down the military and he made this deal and he backed me into a corner that I said in 2009 that I wanted to be backed into, right? That he wanted to get out of Afghanistan all along, but Trump made him do it, right? Like, you can't have it both ways. Either you believed in this or you didn't. First you said you believed in it, but now you're saying it's Trump's fault. Like, this is the epitome of the Joe Biden presidency and the media's coverage of this clown.
Afghanistan, lurching into the third decade of conflict.
Lurching. He was lurching. This guy's a big lurcher.
I stand squarely behind my decision.
You mean the one that Trump backed you into? You stand squarely behind it? You just blamed it on Trump, and now you're standing squarely behind Trump's decision, right? Right? That you followed Trump's decision.
After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces.
See, this was the headline from Huffington Post that I wanted to get to. We shouldn't have went in the first place. This idea of taking over a country and a government that has done nothing to your government. The Taliban, as evil as they may be, I don't know what the Taliban is. I mean, I just know from what America's media and politicians have said about the Taliban, right? Like, I don't know. It's just because might as well be Hydra from Hail Hydra, the Hydra from the Marvel stuff, right? I mean, we don't know what the Taliban is. This is what the media's told us. They told us Gaddafi was a bad leader, and I found out later on that his people loved him. He had 70% approval from his people, and he had done wonderful things in the country. But I had grown up my whole life hearing about what an evil guy that Gaddafi was. So, they lie to us all the time. But what he's saying here is that there was no good time to withdraw their forces. There was no reason to go in here in the first place because the Taliban didn't attack America, didn't do anything to America, right? The Taliban, and he himself said it, he didn't want a nation build and take over governments and do these things, regime change. But he was behind these. He voted for all these wars, right? He voted for it. He said it's somebody who votes for something and says, well, I have my reservations. I don't agree with it, but I'm voting for it anyway. Like, that's somebody who wants to have it both ways. That's a two-faced politician. Take a stand and don't vote for it. Resign under Obama or, make your position publicly known or whatever it was, right? But he said in the presidential debate that he wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan in 2014. So this is what he said. He's debating Paul Ryan as vice president.
We don't want to embolden our enemies to hold and wait out for us and then take over the country.
Martha, that's a bizarre statement.
That's why we want to make sure. No,
that's a bizarre statement since 49 of our allies, hear me, 49 of our allies signed on to this position.
And we're reading that they want
49 of our allies said out in 2014.
See, look at how forceful he's being, right? Out in 2014. This is Joe Biden's signature move here. And those allies weren't, this was an American war, right? Those allies were people that, countries that wanted to be on the good grace, get the good side, be on the good side of America, right? And so they were ready to leave for years. They didn't, their country is like, when are we going to leave? Well, when America says we can. Oh, you want to leave? Yeah, sure. Sooner the better, right? Like, he's making it sound like those other countries had an invested interest in staying in Afghanistan.
It's the responsibility of the Afghans. We have other responsibilities.
Do you think this timeline? But we have soldiers and Marines. We have Afghan forces murdering our forces over there. The Taliban is, do you think, taking advantage of this timeline?
Oh, look, the Taliban, what we found out, and you saw it in Iraq, Martha, unless you set a timeline, Baghdad in the case of Iraq and Kabul in the case of Afghanistan will not step up. They're happy to let us continue to do the job.
What are you talking about, Maghoul? This is a fine, well-trained fighting force. Have you ever seen them do jumping jacks? So this is a video posted to YouTube 7 years ago. This is American drill sergeant, and these are Afghani troops being paid and trained by the Americans. Look at this dude right here. They're doing jumping jacks, right? Yeah, boom. They're learning to do jumping jacks. No, you guys are completely getting it. Like, and they're laughing. Like, boom, but boom, boom. He's going good. He got on a roll there. Whoa, 1 foot out. Whoa. No, these guys are completely going to be able to take the Taliban, right? There's slow motion. Boom. Hey, doom, doom. Hey, really, there you go. Again, posted to YouTube 7 years ago. These were the American soldiers. Everybody knew this was a disaster. Right? There they go. Boom, boom, boom. Laughing along. Hey, wave to everybody. So here's a video. This guy's hand in his pockets. This is from 2010. It was uploaded on YouTube 2010. Don't know when it was from, right? But this is what they were dealing with. There you go. Boom. Yeah, there you go. Jumping jacks. This guy's going. He's got it going on. And over here. So this is, an obvious problem. Look at this thing. Look at this guy right here. He's swimming over here, right? So this was something that was known, right? This is not new. This is something they knew for a while. These guys couldn't even do jumping jacks and God knows what else, right? They were shooting Americans. I mean, all of it.
International security forces did the job. The only way they step up is say, fellas, we're leaving. We've trained you. Step up. Step up.
Let me go back.
That's the only way it works.
Let me go back to the...
How are they going to step up when they can't even do freaking jumping jacks, bro?
The surge troops that we put in there. And you brought this up, Congressman Ryan. I have talked to a lot of troops. I've talked to senior officers who were concerned that the surge troops were pulled out during the fighting season, and some of them saw that as
the fighting season, the spring,
as a political move. So can you tell me, Vice President Biden, what was the military reason for bringing those surge troops home before the fighting season ended?
Bringing those, by the way, when the president announced the surge, you'll remember, Martha,
the surge he just said he's against, right? In this talk today.
Said the surge will be out by the end of the summer. The military said the surge will be out. Nothing political about this. Before the surge occurred. So you be a little straight with me here, too.
Yeah, you be straight, Martha, you fake newser.
Before the surge occurred, we said they'll be out.
Who's he yelling at? Like, even back then, right? Get off my lawn.
Out by the end of the summer. That's what the military said. The reason...
Why are you so angry, bro?
For that is...
Military follows orders. Trust me, there are people who are concerned about pulling out.
There are people that are concerned, but not the Joint Chiefs. That was their recommendation.
So he's blaming Trump for drawing down all of the military, the 15,000 U.S. troops that were left in Afghanistan, to a force of 2,500, right? And so he said by doing that, Trump forced his hand, but he wanted the war to end in 2014. I'll go back to that, right? And he wanted to get out of there then, but he still ends up blaming Trump for something that he wanted to do before Trump even was thinking about running for president.
In the Oval Office to the President of the United States of America. I sat there. I'm sure
he sat there. He's mad. He's mad as hell.
You'll find someone who disagrees with the Pentagon. I'm positive you'll find that within the military. But that's not the case here. And secondly, the reason why the military said that is you cannot wait and have a cliff. It takes, months and months and months to draw down forces.
Let me try and illustrate.
So they didn't get it done. Now, Obama and Biden were campaigning. Look, he's so angry. We're campaigning on getting out of Afghanistan 2014. Here's his position from earlier in the debate.
And in fact, in the meantime, what we said we would do, we would help train the Afghan military. It's their responsibility to take over their own security. That's why with 49 of our allies in Afghanistan, we've agreed on a gradual drawdown, so we're out of there by the year 2014. My friend and the governor say it's based on conditions, which means it depends.
And now you're wearing, but depends.
Does not depend for us. It is the responsibility of the Afghans to take care of their own security. We have trained over 315,000, mostly without incident. There have been more than 24 cases of green on blue where Americans have been killed.
So now after you see the the jumping jacks, you realize, because what he's saying is that there were times they went on joint missions with the Afghans and the Afghans shot American troops. Now it makes a lot more sense, right?
If we do not, if the measures the military has taken do not take hold, we will not go on joint patrols. We will not.
If you don't stop shooting at us, we're not going on joint patrols with you guys. Come on, stop shooting at us with our own weapons and our own bullets that we're giving to you.
Not train in the field. We'll only train in the army bases that exist there. But we are leaving. We are leaving in 2014. Period.
Okay, so that lie, you did, right? So 2014 was 7 years ago. This debate was 2011, which was 10 years ago, and none of those things came true. And so it was only Trump who ended up drawing down the troops even further, but didn't want to withdraw completely because he knew, I mean, they let him know what it was going to look like when he did that. And so given all the stuff that was going on, Trump knew that the media would have a field day if what's happening now to Biden happened to him. And so Trump made a political decision, not the right decision, because, you know, this thing has always been this was always going to happen, right? And so this guy has changed his story so much, and they didn't get out of there in 2014. And now here's a much more confused Joe Biden wearing Depends.
That's why we're still there. We were clear-eyed about the risks. We planned for every contingency, but I always promised the American people that I will be straight with you. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country.
It's their fault. Quitters? These guys, these puppet leaders that we propped up and we put in, and not because the Afghans wanted them. They had no support. They had no, people wouldn't show up at their rallies. People didn't really like them, but we forced them down their throats, you know, kind of like, I don't know, I can't think of anybody in America that would be like that, but, you know, someone who didn't have any enthusiasm behind them and was put into a leadership position, even though the American people really didn't care for him, a career politician.
The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight.
Which was happening in 2002, 19 years ago. There was a guy, I already showed you that in the other video, an expert that CNN put on, that he said he knew immediately the Afghan military that America was training was not going to stand up to the Taliban. He knew in 2002, 2003, whatever it was. He said in the, you know, beginning, like America knew this. And they were shooting at Americans. As JoJo Maghoul said, there's 24 incidents where the blue Afghan army shot at the green American army, 24 times. And that was back in 2011. And so they were not only not going to fight the Taliban, but they were fighting Americans when they went on joint missions together, right? So, you know, I mean, he's always being straight with you.
If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves.
They didn't ask America to come. That's the important piece to know. That he's blaming the Afghan army and the Afghan leadership that didn't ask America to come in. I mean, maybe like, individuals wanted it, but every country wants to throw over, right? Like every country wants to get rid of there's some people that want to get rid of the leadership. Right now, people are desperate to get rid of Joe Biden. Does that mean like if China came in and, took over the country, it would be their responsibility? I mean, it's, the Afghans didn't ask America to come in and occupy the country, which he voted for originally. Like if he didn't vote for the Afghan war, that would be one thing, but he did. He voted for it, and he supported it through his time as senator and then his time as vice president. And no matter what he says, he said he believed about it all along. He was never really for this type of nation-building policy. America has gone in to various countries and taken out the leadership and then put in puppet governments, and the puppet governments always fail. Nation-building doesn't work. It's happened throughout history, far beyond any, there's been no success story of a country that goes and invades a country, puts in a puppet government, and then withdraws their troops, that the government doesn't collapse. It collapses every time. It happened in Libya years ago when they put in King Idris, and eventually, Italy withdrew, and Italy's, close to northern Africa. And so Gaddafi and his military, he was in charge of the military, had a military coup. It happens over and over again. It happened in Iran with the Shah. It's a known, it's a known outcome. When you go in and you take over a country, then you broke it, you bought it, you got to create a government, and the government never sticks because it doesn't come from the will of the people. You put an American government in to Afghanistan, as the Afghanistan government, you handpicked the leadership and you handpicked all these, various aspects of their government. And then when you leave, they're like, hey, yeah, we don't want that, right? That's going to happen 100% of the time. He knows it, or he used to know it. Now he doesn't know very much, but all of his advisors know it, and they knew it for years. And so it was a mistake to go in there, in terms of their official story. They didn't deliver on their official reasons of going in there.
We spent over $1 trillion. We trained and equipped an Afghan military force with some 300,000 strong, incredibly well equipped, a force larger in size than the militaries of many of our NATO allies. We gave them every tool they could need.
And that's all a mistake, right? Like you're blaming them for taking your money and training and not doing your bidding. They played you. Like you're a part of that. You were part of that under Obama, and as senator, you guys got rolled. America got rolled by them. You dumped in billions of dollars into training into the military-industrial complex and dumping weapons and equipment on them, and now they're going to take it and use it against you, like against the will of the American military and the American intelligence community, right?
We paid their salaries.
We paid their salaries. They pay their salaries and
provided for the maintenance of their Air Force, something the Taliban doesn't have.
Look, just deliverance looking M&F-er.
Does not have an Air Force. We provided close air support. We gave them every chance to determine their own future.
And they didn't do it. Man, I don't know what's wrong with them, right?
We could not provide them was the will to fight for that future.
But they didn't have that before. They weren't fighting against the Taliban. And, and we shouldn't get involved anyway. Like if you're not an evil empire, you got to let other countries find their own way. And this is another thing. Whenever you take out a government, it gets worse there. That's a known thing. Like, I know it, they have to know it, right? It doesn't work. If you go in and get rid of a government, no matter how evil the government is, it gets even worse. Thug rule, the country falls apart, and people live in fear, and everything, is worse. We see this in Libya. We see it in all these Arab Spring countries. America knows it. You destabilize the country by taking out a government, especially when there's no real resistance within the country. There wasn't a movement to get rid of the Taliban. The Afghani people weren't saying, hey, America, please come here and get rid of the Taliban. I mean, individuals might have been, but that wasn't something that was, Americans weren't into that, right? Because you could go to every country in the world and find some disgruntled people who want to get rid of the government. And it's not our job to do that. It's their country. It's their sovereignty. And so they didn't ask for it, and you tried to impose it. America did. It's not their fault, right, for taking your money and training and not doing your bidding. It's your fault for continuing to be a part of it, right? Because he was a part of it, because he's been a politician for 40 years, and he was supporting all of these things. All the way back to Operation Ajax in 1960s, he was a part of that, right? That was, ruined Iran, that is still a mess today because of them putting in the Shah, who ended up fleeing the country. This is what happens, right?
There's some very brave and capable Afghan special forces units and soldiers. But if Afghanistan is unable to mount any real resistance to the Taliban now, there is no chance that 1 year, 1 more year, 5 more years, or 20 more years of U.S. military boots in the ground would have made any difference.
Yeah, so it was failed from the beginning. Because after $1 trillion in 20 years, you're finally admitting it was a mistake. You're finally admitting your vote and your president, when you were vice president, would continue to make this mistake over and over again. That this was never going to work. They knew it. They knew that the people they were training weren't going to fight the Taliban. They weren't into it. That the government was going to fall as soon as America left. Historically, they knew it, and they knew it from the way the Afghan people were reacting.
Here's what I believe to my core. It is wrong to order American troops to step up when Afghanistan's own armed forces would not.
So it was wrong for Obama to do that after you promised to leave the country in 2014, when you said, period. We're out in 2014. And then you kept the troops in there for another 2 years. So it was wrong. It was wrong for you to do that, right? You're admitting that it was a mistake for Americans, and it was even before that. It was in 2002 and on, right? That, when American troops were out there fighting for whatever amount of period of time from 2002 to now, and that he was a part of it as vice president during that period of time, and Obama was the commander-in-chief, that was wrong to keep on telling them to fight when the Afghan troops were not only not fighting with them, but were fighting against them. Why they were on joint missions, which he admitted, right? Look at him. He still looks so lost and clueless, right? This is JoJo Maghoul before he was Maghoul. You can see he was much clearer. He was much sharper back then. This is 1980 when JoJo was in his prime and before he was Magoo in it. And he is talking to Ted Koppel about the Iranian hostage crisis and Russia being in Afghanistan.
Pilots asking me, Senator, when do you think we'll be sent and if we'll be sent? To the crewmen asking me whether or not I thought the Russians were going to make any further moves in Afghanistan, or whether or not I thought there'd be a diplomatic solution to the situation with regard to our hostages. That was the thrust of most of the questions that were asked.
And what did you tell them?
Well, I told them, number one, that I thought that that there was an absolute need for their presence in the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea, not just for the hostages, which was very important, but also, and if almost primarily, because of the Soviet incursion into Afghanistan and the show of force both to the Soviets and to the Iranians and also to the Arab nations that we were prepared, capable, and willing to use physical force to defend what we viewed to be our vital interest. I also...
So he's saying here that, this is when the Soviets were in war with Afghanistan, which shortly after the Soviet Union collapse, which is something that happens to empires when they go to Afghanistan. That's been, that's something like it's a well-known fact, right? It's where empires go to die. And he's saying that he said to the troops that he wanted them, or he wanted or thought there needed to be a military presence near Iran and Afghanistan and in the Middle East to defend American interests, right? That's what his view was back then and for years.
I also told them that I was not of the opinion that the use of force at this time by way of the use of military force was the best way to accommodate the release and the safe release of the 50 hostages.
Well, now, Senator, you almost seem to be saying that you expect a force of this kind to remain out there indefinitely.
Well, let me put it this way, Mr. Koppel. Even if the hostages are released tomorrow, I would not advise the President of the United States, were he to ask, to remove that force. I think it's absolutely essential that we have a major show of force in that area of the world, because my concern is first and foremost for the safety of those hostages, but even beyond that is for the protection of keeping the Straits of Hormuz open, being able to interdict any Soviet activity in the area, and having a significant airstrike capability to counter Soviet moves either in Afghanistan or south of Afghanistan and into Baluchistan or into Iran itself.
Senator Biden.
So he wanted a military force out there, right? Now he's saying he didn't ever want that. That was not what he believed, but that's what he believed then. That's what he believed as vice president. That's what he believed as senator who voted for the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, right? And now he's trying to claim that he had a different policies. You can see the difference in the guy, right? I mean, he wasn't great then. Like, he got caught running for president, right? Lying about his family, plagiarizing speeches. And, he was a disaster, but he was much better then than he is now.
The political leaders of Afghanistan were unable to come together for the good of their people, unable to negotiate for the future of their country when the chips were down. They would never have done so while U.S. troops remained in Afghanistan, bearing the brunt of the fighting for them. And our true strategic competitors, China and Russia, would love nothing more than the United States to continue to funnel billions of dollars in resources and attention into stabilizing Afghanistan indefinitely.
Again, that's true, all of that, but it's not about now cutting and running, right? It was about never going in, right? It was addressing the policies that he endorsed, that George W. Bush put forth in 2001 after the big event. That there was going to be these wars. We knew they were coming. The one in Afghanistan made more sense than the one in Iraq, but neither one of them had anything to do with what happened, the catalyst for these wars. And he's still pitching these ideas of fear and all these things, right? And, I mean, it was all based in deception.
When I hosted President Ghani and Chairman Abdullah at the White House in June, and again when I spoke by phone to Ghani in July, we had very frank conversations. We talked about how Afghanistan should prepare to fight their civil wars after the U.S. military departed, to clean up the corruption in government so the government could function for the Afghan people. We talked extensively about the need for Afghan leaders to unite politically. They failed to do any of that.
They failed to do any of that. What, your puppet government that America put in there, that the Afghan people didn't endorse, weren't excited about, like this guy, right? I mean, like the Taliban was Trump, in this analogy. Trump was the Taliban, and they, put this guy in because the Taliban had to go, Trump had to go, right? And they put a guy in that nobody really liked. There was no enthusiasm behind him, and he was only there because Trump was so much worse to the people that voted for him, the people that supported Joe Biden candidacy. Most of them, almost all of them, were anti-Trump. They weren't pro-Biden. And so that's the same thing that's happened in a much larger scale with with the military imposing a leadership, American, intelligence community, American politicians imposing a government in Afghanistan that saw this brief opportunity to loot America, right, of military training and weapons and money, and then get out of Dodge when the Taliban took over the country. And so, that's what happened. Like, he's admitting it, but they wouldn't admit it for years. They wouldn't even talk about this as what was going to happen. Everyone knew as soon as America left, because that's why they kept troops there, that the Afghan military and government would collapse and the Taliban would take back over. And whoever got, left holding the bag, in this case it's Biden, could have been Trump, it could have been Obama, it could have even been George W. Bush, because, mission accomplished, remember? They went into Afghanistan, and then almost immediately after, in 2001, in October, they went to Afghanistan, and then in the spring of 2003, they went into Iraq. And when they went into Iraq, Afghanistan took a back seat and just has been lingering ever since, and this decision has been out there, not just the decision, but the outcome of the decision, which is the Taliban retaking the country was going to happen, right? If you're going to be honest and frank with the American people, you would say it was a mistake from the beginning.
I also urge them to engage in diplomacy, to seek a political settlement with the Taliban. This advice was flatly refused. Mr. Ghani insisted the Afghan forces would fight, but obviously he was wrong. So I'm left again to ask of those who argue that we should stay.
See, the majority of this speech, you're 10 minutes into it, right? The majority of his speech here, there's been about 5 or 6 minutes blaming the Afghani people, the Afghan military and their leadership, for something that they were just a puppet government. And then he blamed Trump for something that he said he wanted to do under Obama, which was to remove the forces, U.S. military forces, in 2014. So he blamed Trump, even though he was, saying that he made the right decision, that Trump forced his hand into making the right decision. He still had to crap on Trump because his whole presidency is about blaming Trump for everything, right? Which nobody's buying. Like, Trump is the least responsible because he wasn't a political leader that was endorsing these wars and voting for them, or, any of it, right? Even he said he was against these wars in the beginning. Whether he was or not, he was not even on The Apprentice yet when these wars started, which I covered in another video. And so it wasn't Trump's fault. And this puppet government did what puppet governments do, and they collapsed because there's no energy, enthusiasm. They're not part of the sovereign rule of a country. A country creates its own government, whatever it is, good, bad, or indifferent. The country gets the government it deserves. And if an oppositional force comes in and imposes a government on the people, it always collapses, right? And now he's like just kind of, he's a little bit lost here, just lost in Maghoul land.
How many more generations of America's daughters and sons would you have me send to fight Afghanistan's civil war when Afghan troops will not? How many more lives, American lives, is it worth? How many endless rows of headstones at Arlington National Cemetery?
See, nobody's saying we want to stay in Afghanistan. I don't think anybody wants to stay there. I don't think any American right now, with all the crises and what's happened with COVID and all the rest of it, wants to stay or wants American military to be in Afghanistan. I don't think people have a problem with leaving. Like, people are saying, no, we got to stay. That's not happening. What people are mad about and upset about is what was it all for, right? They're realizing, which many of us realized years ago, that these were all bogus wars that we were lied into, lied about the objectives, because the Taliban is back in control. And the way we're leaving, it looks like another Vietnam, but even worse. That's what people are mad about, which he's not addressing here. See, he began this by claiming it was a success. He boasted about what they did to, bad actors in Afghanistan and, the whole kind of thing that happened in Pakistan, with SEAL Team 6, it seems to be a complete, it doesn't hold up to the scrutiny of fact checkers, not Snopes, but real fact checkers. And so, he started off by saying, mission accomplished, we did great things in Afghanistan, which you can't say, because it's either a complete mistake or it's not. Now, I agree with removing the troops, because we never should have been there in the first place. And I don't blame him for what's happening right now in terms of there was no way around it. This was going to happen. This was how this thing was going to end. So I don't blame him for any of this stuff that's happening now. I blame the past version of JoJo Maghoul and Obama, and more so George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, which they didn't stand up to, who created these policies. And he went along with it. He supported it when he should have opposed it back then, because this is, him not opposing something that was wrong. They were all supporting this war. JoJo Maghoul voted for this war multiple times, all these wars, and he was a part of that administration that took it to a new level with the Arab Spring, right? And so those are the policies that need to be examined here. But like I said in the introduction to this video, without these wars, we would have had, America would have collapsed economically and socially in so many other ways, right? America's, the reason that we're still going is because of these wars. And no one wants to say it. You can't get into a war and say, we're an evil empire and we have to, and our main export is war. Military-industrial complex is, it survives based in fear and based in conflict on a global basis. And if there was no global war, America would collapse because our primary export is military equipment and war type of materials and, infrastructure rebuilding and things like that.
Clear on my answer. I will not repeat the mistakes we've made in the past. Mistake of staying and fighting indefinitely in a conflict that is not in the national interest of the United States, of doubling down on a civil war in a foreign country.
That's what Obama did when he did the surge in 2000 and 2010, is it? Or when was the surge? Whenever the surge was, I showed you that speech. Obama dumped 30,000 more troops into Afghanistan when he promised to get out of there and end those wars. And he was backing him. The mistakes of the past, he's blaming Obama for this. Say his name. Say his name. Say his name, Joe. It's Obama, because you blame Trump for something that you said you were always for, which is get rid of the troops. You blamed him for something you just said, that you would make that mistake again, that you would double down. You said Trump, was getting the troops out of there and was doing what you said needed to be done, but you blamed him. And then you said you wouldn't double down like Obama did, but you're not saying his name. Say his frickin' name, Joe.
Of attempting to remake a country through the endless military deployments of U.S. forces. Those are the mistakes we cannot continue to repeat, because we have significant vital interest in the world that we cannot afford to ignore. I also want to acknowledge how painful this is to so many of us. The scenes we're seeing in Afghanistan, they're gut-wrenching, particularly for our veterans, our diplomats, humanitarian workers, for anyone who has spent time on the ground working to support the Afghan people.
And the Vietnam vets, because the same thing happened in Vietnam, which was our last war before this war. And so there's military actions in between Vietnam and the war in Afghanistan, but this was the first war. And it's basically the outcome is, identical. It was a country that they grow poppies and export heroin, which was a part of this, which he's not getting into, admitting to, right? The, opiate crisis that happened in 2009 and 10 after the surge, when Obama put 30,000 more troops in there. And there was the opioid crisis that affected Americans in America, most of it coming from Afghanistan, which was the leading exporter of heroin and opioids, right? All of this stuff. And so, this is this guy. Just look, he's always clueless here. Every time I stop, he's just lost and confused. But it was about those original policies that he was endorsing, This is why he's culpable, not because of what he's doing now, which is, it was the inevitable outcome. Like whoever did this was going to get stuck with the imagery that everyone's seeing, and the American people who aren't, this is your sheeple moment, right? You're a sheeple and you just got shown that your country has engaged in criminal activity globally and, imposing its will, and it's about our lifestyle, all the things that you love, that you want to have in terms of your American privileges, right? And the pro-war aspect, the war aspect of America, the violence in our movies, the violence in every aspect of our culture and our sports, and the, army and the troops and the way that they're characterized. Thank you for their service, right? And that, everyone's trying to steal our freedom, which is really our resources, which is really their resources, right? They don't want us eating or gorging in our ghoul holes their resources, us going to their countries based in a faulty currency system where our currency is valued more than their currency, and that we, take from them their products, whatever material products they make are exported to America based in all of this, and the American military is a big part of it.
For those who have lost loved ones in Afghanistan, and for Americans who have fought and served in the country, serve our country in Afghanistan, this is deeply, deeply personal. It is for me as well. I've worked on these issues as long as anyone. I've been throughout Afghanistan during this war, while the war was going on, from Kabul to Kandahar to the Kunar Valley. I've traveled there on 4 different occasions. I met with the people. I've spoken to the leaders. I spent time with our troops. And I came to understand firsthand what was and was not possible in Afghanistan. So now we're focused on what is possible.
That's right, JoJo Maghoul. If anybody's focused, it's you. You're focused. You're so focused, JoJo. Don't focus us, though. Stay focused, JoJo.
So now we're focused on what is possible. We will continue to support the Afghan people. We will lead with our diplomacy, our international influence, and our humanitarian aid. We'll continue to push for regional diplomacy and engagement to prevent violence and instability.
Yeah, you no longer have any influence on Afghanistan.
We'll continue to speak out for the basic rights of the Afghan people.
No, you won't. You're just going to want to sweep this thing under the rug. You're going to continuously speak out. This is the last you're going to hear of it. When this thing blows over, everyone's going to want to forget about the failure of Afghanistan, and most of all him, because they're going to be bringing it up. If he ran for re-election, it doesn't look like he's going to be up for the task, because he's melting down mentally really quickly. But they're going to, bring this up in ads, and, this is going to be something that's going to be brought up in every debate or whatever it was, right? His failure. Yeah, we're going to continue to talk about it. No, you aren't. Come on, Debbie.
Of women and girls, just as we speak out all over the world. I've been clear.
He's been speaking out all over the world. He's been exploding with his verbiage all over the world.
The human rights must be the center of our foreign policy, not the periphery. But the way to do it is not through endless military deployments. It's with our diplomacy, our economic tools, and rallying the world to join us. Let me lay out the current mission in Afghanistan.
Yeah, go ahead. Lay it out there, JoJo.
I was asked to authorize, and I did, 6,000 U.S. troops to deploy to Afghanistan for the purpose of assisting in the departure of U.S. and allied civilian personnel from Afghanistan, and to evacuate our Afghan allies and vulnerable Afghans to safety outside of Afghanistan.
They're fleeing to Iran. It's so bad, they're fleeing to Iran, right? Afghanistan's so bad that Iran is better.
Our troops are working to secure the airfield and to ensure continued operation of both the civilian and military flights. We're taking over air traffic control. We have safely shut down our embassy and transferred our diplomats. Our diplomatic presence is now consolidated at the airport as well. Over the coming days, we intend to transport out thousands of American citizens who've been living and working in Afghanistan. We'll also continue to support the safe departure of civilian personnel, the civilian personnel of our allies who are still serving in Afghanistan. Operation Allies Refugee.
Operation Allies.
Which I announced back in July, has already...
July, he announced it.
He moved 2,000 Afghans who are eligible for special immigration visas and their families to the United States. In the coming days, the U.S. military will provide assistance to move more SIV.
So all the people that would be starting some sort of revolution, these are all people who are anti-Taliban, who are American assets in Afghanistan, are fleeing. Like, you understand this? There's no resistance. The people that were into America being there are either leaving, or the powerful ones are being brought to America to live in America, right? And so you're literally taking the resistance with you. He said that they need to fight for themselves, but they're not going to do that if all you leave behind are the people that are, cool with the Taliban, or people who weren't willing to step up in the first place and, try to do something different. And so, I mean, this is a failure on epic level.
Eligible Afghans and their families out of Afghanistan. We're also expanding refugee access to cover other vulnerable Afghans who worked for our embassy. U.S. non-governmental agencies, or U.S. non-governmental organizations, and Afghans who otherwise are at great risk, in U.S. news agencies. I know there are concerns about why we did not begin evacuating Afghans civilians sooner. Part of the answer is some of the Afghans did not want to leave earlier.
Yeah, sure. That's not part of the answer. What about the ones who did?
Still hopeful for their country. And part of it because the Afghan government and its supporters discouraged us from organizing a mass exodus to avoid triggering, as they said, a crisis of confidence.
The crisis of confidence.
American troops are performing this mission as professionally and as effectively as they always do, but it is not without risks. As we carry out this departure, we have made it clear to the Taliban, if they attack our personnel or disrupt our operation, the U.S. presence will be swift, and the response will be swift and forceful.
So we're going to go back in? Are you saying? If the Taliban, of course they're not going to do anything. You're leaving. Like, why? That would be stupid for them to lose, troops and fire weapons and things when America's leaving. Like, this is a hollow threat. But if they did do something, it wouldn't stop what's going to happen. You're not going to go back in. Hey, we're going to leave, but you guys pissed us off. So now we're going to go back in and nation build, even though I said I was firmly against it. Right? It's just this hollow threat.
We will defend our people with devastating force if necessary. Our current military mission will be short in time, limited in scope, and focused
limitless scope
in its objectives. get our people and our allies as safely as quickly as possible. And once we have completed this mission, we will conclude our military withdrawal. We will end America's longest war after 20 long years of bloodshed. The events we're seeing now are sadly proof that no amount of military force would ever deliver a stable, united, secure Afghanistan.
Or any other country. It has to come from within. What I talked about, the heartfulness system, the difference of trying to impose force from without or create change from within. I mean, this is central to what I believe. You know, in my own personal life as a human being, as a sovereign human being, and what's going on now with all the force that's being used by this clown and the people on, you know, that are censoring people and won't let people talk about, or, you know, I mean, there's only one point of view that's okay right now, according to him and the media, on, you know, serious subjects. We're not allowed to even talk about certain things because you're imposing your will from outside. You're externally imposing your will and telling us what to believe inside and how wrong we are, right? This MNFer and all these other MNFers are imposing it here in America just like they did on the Afghanistan people who are a sovereign nation. And you're a sovereign person, and change has to come from within. You can't force it on other people. That's why I always say, well, you don't like what I have to say? Good, you can leave, right? I don't, you know. I'm not forcing my opinion or my beliefs on you. Don't want to do it. I'm not responsible for you or anybody else, right? I just express myself. And, you know, the heartfulness system works internally with transmission and cleaning that works on an etheric level, the etheric heart and the etheric regions, to help your soul emerge. Your soul will choose this, right? Your soul will choose a deeper connection to God, and your soul wants to feel the transmission given in the heartfulness system. And then therefore your, you know, the changes that occur in your ego and on your persona and your, you know, who you are as a human being come from a soul level from within, from the deepest levels of the center of your being. Like he was talking about the periphery, but you're trying to enforce something in Afghanistan from America. It doesn't work. Never does. Never will. We saw it in America, right? As soon as they lifted the restrictions, like for masks, as soon as they lifted the restrictions for, you know, something, remember? All the people stopped doing it because they never believed in it internally. They were just forced to do it. And as soon as these restrictions were lifted, everybody, you know, even whether they fit into the category or not, just stopped doing it, right? And so that's because you're imposing it from the outside.
As known in history as the graveyard of empires. What's happening now could just as easily happen 5 years ago or 15 years in the future. You have to be honest. Our mission in Afghanistan has taken many missteps, made many missteps over the past 2 decades. I'm now the 4th American president to preside over war in Afghanistan. 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. I will not pass this responsibility on to a 5th president. I will not.
Kamala Harris? Or who? DeSantis? It's not going to be Cuomo's. Trump's? Like, who are you saving here, JoJo Maghoul? Is this a way for them to protect Kamala, who isn't, you know, is so unliked already? I mean, who's pulling the strings here, JoJo?
Not mislead the American people by claiming that just a little more time in Afghanistan will make all the difference.
Nobody cared about Afghanistan. You weren't forced to do this despite what you said about Trump. I'm not, again, blaming him for what's happening because, not now, but in the past I am. Not blaming. He is responsible. This isn't about me blaming anybody. This is about them all being responsible for this obvious mistake but it isn't a mistake for the real reasons. To keep the American economy and the military-industrial complex going, to fend off a economic collapse and the, you know, debt-based system. I mean, this is the real objectives were achieved, to make these guys rich, all these people who, these warmongers like Dick Cheney and all these people, Halliburton, all these people who walked away with cash because of the opioids that were exported from Afghanistan, the opioid crisis, and all the rest of it, right? Those objectives were achieved and were successful. The true reasons for going to war. But in terms of, what's happening now, yeah, well, this was going to happen to somebody at some point. They were going to be blamed for what we're seeing because this is how lies end, right? This is how deception ends, with the truth coming out that this was never really, about the reasons that you were told as an American for going to war.
Nor will I shrink from my share of responsibility for where we are today and how we must move forward from here. I am President of the United States of America, and the buck stops with me.
And the Afghanistan government that didn't stand up, Obama, who you didn't name, who doubled down, and for Trump. But other than that, it stops with you, even though it kind of isn't really your fault. If those Afghanistan people did what Americans wanted to do, you wouldn't be in this position.
I'm deeply saddened by the facts we now face. But I do not regret my decision to end America's warfighting in Afghanistan and maintain a laser focus on our counterterrorism missions there and other parts of the world. Our mission to degrade the terrorist threat of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and kill Osama bin Laden was a success. Our decades-long effort to overcome centuries of history and permanently...
The bottom line is the event that happened in 2001 was, I believe, 3,400 American lives, right? That were lost in that event, according to the official story. So if you're keeping count, right, 3,500 coalition soldiers, 2/3 of them, so that was about 2,500, 2,600 American troops died in Afghanistan, and 20,000 U.S. soldiers have been injured. Over 7,000 soldiers died in Iraq, right? So this is, between the two wars, it's about 1,100 as opposed to 4,000 random citizens. These are soldiers and people that are considered, sacrificing for their country, who are given a little bit more to America in terms of Americans' worldview, right, or view of American soldiers. So 1,100 of them died for basically nothing because, this so-called payback. In terms of Afghan civilians, 70,000 Afghans and Pakistani civilians died in the Afghan war. Over 1.2 million deaths in Iraq, as opposed to 3,000 Americans. And the trillions of dollars it costs the soldiers' lives to deal with this, right? Like, it's not cost effective. If there's angry, disgruntled people that are, hateful against America for probably good reasons, that do something, what are considered bad actors, it's not cost effective to go and in terms of, the lives of innocent people in those countries, because these are innocent people, most of them, because there wasn't very many soldier deaths in Iraq. And then in Libya, they call it the Libyan Civil War. It was never that, right? They just made a decision to get rid of Gaddafi, which the British government came out and said, yeah, it was all BS, is between 2,500 and 20,000, 25,000. It's probably more than 25,000. And then what's happened since then when they removed a government. So America got, a big event that happened and lost almost 4,000 lives. And they went out and, killed about 1.5 million people in various countries. And to what effect, right? Innocent civilians and just the quality of life in those countries. I mean, it's wrong on every level. This is immoral. It's something to keep our country going, but it's the price that no one wants to pay because it's something that no one wants to look at it because no one wants to admit they live in an evil empire, right? We have an empire, we're the empire, and this is how empires keep on going. Empires are built on the suffering of other people, of oppressed people.
Change and remake Afghanistan was not and I wrote and believed it never could be. I cannot and will not ask our troops to fight on endlessly in another country's civil war, taking casualties.
It's not a civil war. They had a government. You went in there. You voted for this, MNFer. American military went in there, just like with Libya and Iraq, and took down a government, which left conflict, which you created, which we created as a country. And now they have a civil war, but not really, because they're just going back to what they were doing before, which was having the Taliban rule over them. That's the power in the country. And that's, and the Taliban rose out of America supporting whatever groups of people that were fighting against the Soviets, which you were, into, right? The Taliban emerged out of, the Soviet war when the Soviets went in there.
Suffering life-shattering injuries, leaving families broken by grief and loss. This is not in our national security interest. It is not what the American people want. It is not what our troops, who have sacrificed so much over the past 2 decades, deserve.
Why'd you vote for it then? Right? So they'll go back to that original mistake and say, hey, I should never have voted for this. That I, was wrong. Like, just say that. Like, that's all you would have to do. That you should have never supported this in the beginning.
I made a commitment to the American people when I ran for president that I would bring America's military involvement in Afghanistan to an end.
But then Trump, but you're blaming it on Trump, right? Yeah, you can't have it both ways.
While it's been hard and messy, and yes, far from perfect, I've honored that commitment. More importantly, I made a commitment to the brave men and women who serve this nation that I wasn't going to ask them to continue to risk their lives in a military action that should have ended long ago. Our leaders did that in Vietnam when I got here as a young man. I will not do it in Afghanistan. I know my decision will be criticized, but I would rather take all that criticism than pass this decision on to another president of the United States, yet another one, a fifth one, because it's the right one, it's the right decision for our people, the right one for our brave service members who risk their lives serving our nation, and it's the right one for America. Thank you. May God protect our troops, our diplomats, and all brave Americans serving in harm's way.
So this is it right here. Look at this. That's just not a great view here. But look at this, Mr. Burns MNFer. He just criticized the Afghanistan leader and the Afghanistan people for not standing up and risking their lives against the Taliban. And he is running away from the questions of the media. He's run away. They've hid him away during his entire presidency and during the election. They hid him away from, they used all kinds of excuses, closed down the country in part to hide him away, right? And they just let Trump be Trump, and they hammered Trump, and, they fanned the flames of Trump hatred, but they hid this guy away because he wasn't up for the job, right? But he's complaining about these Afghans not standing up to something that's life-threatening, and the Afghan leader and government collapsing. And here he is. He needs to face this and stand there and face the questions, right? Not reading from a script, not reading from a teleprompter, but answer questions, and he's not up for the task. And he's running the F away. This is great. This is, run, MNF, run.
Mr. President, what do you make of the Afghans?
And then he put other people out there to answer the questions. That's what they expect from this guy. Hidden away, running in behind a fake fern, ducking away behind a fake and an MNF fern. That's JoJo Maghoul. So this video is, I don't know, an hour and 50 minutes? It was crazy, or whatever it is. Hour and 40-something minutes. And I'm adding to it right here. And I was going to do other stuff on Chris Cuomo and these other things I mentioned, but obviously just I had to, when I made the original screenshot of the speech, I looked at it, I said, wait, it's an hour and 30 minutes? Like I had to, I have to watch it again. It's brutal. So I'm going to end this thing here, and then I'll get to the Cuomo stuff and the other stuff tomorrow or tonight or something like that. Only spirituality will save the world, running away, JoJo Maghouls. It's Paul Romano, definitely pointing from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.